if you're a lesbian and you don't fancy the bloke when he's a bloke, the government issuing him with a document saying he's a woman is not going to change that. This has to be one of the few movements where the more people get to know about it, the more they oppose it. You can't protect a sex category if that category has both sexes in it. Campaigners in other parts of the world are looking at us and saying, you know, they've managed to be Terf Island. I wanted people to get the sort of inside story about what it was like to be a pioneer in a very difficult field. What were you thinking then? How did that feel? Pretty much every woman in that book thought, well, everyone will see how crazy it is. And then it was a complete shock to discover that that wasn't enough. I wanted to make sure that people knew the important work that a few women had done that was so critical. And you can do it too. I remember reading that and thinking, what? What? Maybe that's part of our success as Terf Island.
Hi everyone, I am here with Fiona McAnena, the author of Terf Island, and of course you're part of Sex Matters. When did you join Sex Matters?
Early last year, yeah, February 2024.
Okay, so we'll talk about that as well.
Okay.
But obviously the reason why we're here is to talk about this book, Terf Island, how the UK resisted trans ideology. Immediately it feels like an invitation, right? Because also it says welcome to Terf Island quite early on.
I was originally going to call it Welcome to Terf Island, you see.
That really appeals to me because it says like, yes, we're Terf Island, come on board. So what made you go for that title?
Well, I heard it so much, and I heard people say it as a criticism, contemptuously, and I heard people say it as almost in admiration. You know, they've managed to be Terf Island. And you probably remember someone posted a map of the world and it had lights to show, like a light map to show where the intense Terf activity was. And of course the UK lit up like a beacon. And I thought, let's embrace it. Let's be proud of what we've done, because we know that campaigners in other parts of the world are looking at us and saying, you're making some headway and we'd like to know how you did that. We'd like to do that too. So I felt I wanted to embrace it.
And to invite others to join, because it says here early on, for everyone who found their voice and for everyone who needs help to find theirs. Courage calls to courage everywhere. So from the outset, it feels like a positive book.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I wrote it was because as the resistance grows, I'm meeting more and more people who don't know the history. And sometimes that doesn't matter. But I wanted them, in particular, I wanted to make sure that people knew the important work that a few women had done that was so critical. And Stephanie Davies-arai, who I think she would never say this, and she doesn't even want me saying it, but I think she has done more than any other individual to protect children in the UK from having their fertility and their sexual function destroyed by puberty blockers, you know, because she has been on this almost 10 years now.
Right.
And she has been part, as you can tell from the book, part of the critical campaigns to stop the use of puberty blockers. So I wanted to make sure people knew that. She's quite a modest person, and like I say, I was meeting people who had no idea. And then before I joined Sex Matters, I worked for 5 years with Nicola Williams from Fair Play for Women. Yeah. And again, because the campaign that she generated really out of nothing in 2018 was the single most significant factor that the government mentioned when they finally decided not to pursue sex self-ID. I wanted people to know that. And even before she did that, she raised the awareness about the problem of men in women's prisons. That problem is not solved, but we've made some progress. So that was my motivation, is to say, look at what these women did, and you can do it too. And actually, when they agreed to be part of it, it wasn't because they wanted to be celebrated, but they did recognize that having other people understand that you don't have to wait to be appointed, you don't have to build an organization, you can just start doing it, that can be really powerful. And so they did want to, I think, motivate people in other countries. And then, of course, Maya Forstater, that I work with now, and Kellie-Jay, who is you know, when she travels, she absolutely motivates people all over the world. I decided to pick the campaigns that those 4 women led to kind of anchor the story, so that it's a collection of stories. It's not a theoretical book. It's not a history book. It's a collection of stories. And then in those stories, I wove in other people, both for and against trans ideology. And I wove in, you know, what was happening in the legal landscape, the media landscape. So, but I really wanted it to be accessible, to be a book people would enjoy reading. Because sometimes I read books in this field where I feel like I'm doing homework by reading them.
Interesting, because a good number of books have now been published, which is great to have this growing body of work. Some of them focus very much on the medical side of things, like Time to Think by Hannah Barnes. Some more on the What the Hell Is This All About, which is more trans by Helen Joyce.
Which is a great read, actually. That's a page turner too, I think.
Then we have the books that are more about, from the parents' point of view, what do you do? Like, I think Stella O'Malley and Sasha Ayad. Az Hakim did a book called Detrans.
Yes, I've read that.
And then there's Transpositions, which was all about ordinary people, what made you peak. There's Material Girls by Kathleen Stock. And then there's Hounded by Jenny Lindsay. So, and The Women Who Would Wished. So it's being approached from all these different angles. Gareth Roberts, who wrote Gay Shame, approaching from the gay male angle.
That's a good book. I enjoyed that.
But this seems like this is not just about the theoretical side of it or the harm that's been done. This is more about what sort of got the resistance going. How did it gain momentum, which is an incredibly important part. To say, okay, this is how you lead the fight back. So the book focuses specifically on the 4 women that you mentioned.
Yeah, I tell their story, the story of the main campaign that they drove,
And you mentioned specific events in there, other people that they came in contact with, other people that pushed back against them. So it's a story about the resistance, but also the resistance against the resistance.
Well, yeah, that's a great point, because actually, you know, one thing that they have in common is they pretty much every one of them thought, once they came across what was happening, you know, sterilizing children, reinforcing sex stereotypes as if that's the real you, telling children who didn't fit sex stereotypes that they were wrong, when in fact they might instead grow up to be gay or not, putting men in women's prisons. They all thought, when they stumbled across their particular peaking story, they thought, well, once this gets out there, it'll be stopped.
Yes.
I mean, this is what you hear Graham Linehan say a lot too.
I was just going to bring that up.
Yeah. So, you know, they also, pretty much every woman in that book thought, well, once I get the story, I just need to raise awareness of this because everyone will see how crazy it is. And then it was a complete shock to discover that that wasn't enough, because it's so extreme that people would say that can't be happening.
Yes.
That doesn't, that's no, that. And even Stephanie, when she started with the medical stuff, the treatment of children, she thought, well, there must be something the medics know that I don't know.
Right.
And so they were kind of shocked and shocked again as they got into it, because the first shock of finding out what's going on, then the shock of finding out that people, in fact, don't really care. The shock of finding out in Stephanie's case that the medics didn't necessarily have a clear medical model, didn't have proof, didn't have evidence that what they were doing was the best option for, you know, confused or unhappy children. That they were all relying on somehow someone else having decided. Yeah. So then when something terrible happened, like the Karen White thing, you know, the man who eventually was convicted of rape, but he was on remand. He was put in a women's prison because he said he identified as a woman. He sexually assaulted other women there. That's another example where Nick Williams thought, well, surely that won't be allowed to happen again. But the government just shrugged it off and said, oh, that's a one-off, that's a policy failure, you know, but it won't happen again. Of course, it happens because the policy is designed to let it happen.
Yeah. So the question is, because they always try to turn it, they always try to frame it as, oh, that's just one bad apple, rather than, no, it's the policy that we have to look at. Why was the policy designed specifically that way, and specifically without input from, for example, women's organisations? Like especially that's really clear in Scotland, and how in 2014 Scottish Trans Alliance got in there and got the policy changed.
Yeah. You know, I think a lot about this because it's so kind of baffling, and I talk to a lot of people who are trying to make policies, and they're not on one side or the other. They're in sports bodies, or they're in, in organizations that employ a lot of people. And some of them are just so naive. I mean, I think a lot of them have been played by activists, but they have this kind of naive idea that, we did gay rights and we did women's rights, and now we're doing trans rights.
Yeah, simple.
And of course, if you're doing trans rights, who do you talk to? You talk to the people who represent the trans organizations. And some of them genuinely had not cottoned on to the fact that what they were doing was undoing women's rights. And then children, that's a whole other thing, because if responsible clinicians in a specialist clinic tell you that this is the right thing, who are you to question it?
You think they're the experts. And a friend of mine came up from the Netherlands from university days, so this goes back to the mid-90s. He came over last year with his 15-year-old son, and the evening before he sent me a picture of the two of them, and straight away I thought, oh please, let this just be a kind of an awkward looking kid with long hair. But straight away I kind of sensed, there's something going on here. And unfortunately I was right. So he'd been living as a girl,
whatever that is,
for 2 years, which in his case meant growing his hair.
Does that mean you're living as a girl?
Well, I had a blow dry this morning. But the stylist didn't want to do it because I'm a man. So the stylist I'd book in with actually said, oh, I can't do your hair because I don't do men. And I should have made a big fuss about, how can you tell that I'm a man? Have you done a chromosome test? Have you checked my pronouns?
I don't even know myself what I am.
Sparkle gender, whatever. But long story short, he basically took a girl's name, girl pronouns, girl's clothes, grew his hair for 2 years. Now, the reason he went down that path is because he got bullied relentlessly because he's autistic and he's awkward. After 2 years, he reverted back. So I guess we call that he desisted. So when I met him, his hair was short. So I asked my friend, why does he have short hair now? And my friend was like, well, because, it's going back to being a boy. And I had my hair down on purpose on that day. Because I'm like, isn't the lesson here that he can have his hair as long as he wants?
But the whole thing relies on stereotypes.
And they put him on bloggers to give him time to think. So even though he had so-called desisted...
What, even after he cut his hair?
Yes, to give him time to think.
But it doesn't work. Do they not understand that the one thing it doesn't do is give people time to think?
So it
stops them from thinking.
What takes me back to what you said earlier, you think they're the experts and you trust them. And my friend literally said, when it was just the two of us, he said, well, at the gender clinic, they're the ones wearing the white coats, so they're the ones I trust. He's got a high-flying job in a bank somewhere. He's never got any time. I'll park this issue with the experts.
Well, it's
even though the experts don't even know what they're doing.
Well, I mean, it's a reasonable thing for your friend to trust the doctors. And that's, again, I think part of why it was so hard to get the word out, because sometimes we sound like conspiracy theorists.
Yeah, crazy.
The idea that you're saying that this is all being done without anyone really understanding it, and it's just reinforcing sex stereotypes, and there's no medical model for it, and it just sounds too crazy.
So I just want to take a few steps back and look at your own sort of peaking experience and how you got involved with Nicola Williams, whether you were already friends or you just came across each other somehow. How did that work in your case? Yeah,
and of course, the book isn't about me at all. I'm hardly in there. I didn't want to write about myself particularly, and I only had to make an appearance just to explain how I met some of these people. But so in 2018, I started to see this stuff online. So I think Pips Bunce was the first person I came across. And I had a good friend, a man who's bisexual, who lives in another country. And I don't know how we got talking about it, but we got talking. And he was doing a master's in Judith Butler or something. And he was really, he was at the other end of the spectrum, but I didn't know at the time, and so he would say some stuff and then I would say some stuff. And I was working out what I thought, and he was an absolute trans activist, but only because he thought it was the right thing. I mean, we were both kind of naive. And so then I once you see it, then you start to see more and more. So I saw this character, Pips Bunce. I thought, that's crazy. I read it in the Financial Times about him being on this list.
Right, so he was the bloke who lived as a woman part-time?
Yeah, so he has the two personas at work. So he's called Philip Bunce. His Twitter profile said he was a proud husband and father. There was nothing there to say he was anything other than a man. But he was featured in these Financial Times lists of women in finance as a role model because he had this alter ego called Pips or Pippa and would go to work dressed like that in a very extreme feminine stereotype with a wig and pink dress and heels and fancy stockings. And of course, most women in the city don't dress like that. Yeah. But anyway, and I kind of tweeted about that, and I immediately was blocked by him, by his employer. And I was nobody on Twitter. Yeah. I thought, this isn't right. I said, you may be a role model for gender nonconformity, but you're not doing anything to advance the careers of women by doing this. And I was like, that you can't say that. That's hateful. So through 2018, the consultation was going on about self-ID, and I responded to lots of things. Actually, the Scottish government was consulting on the meaning on the Gender Representation on Public Boards Act.
Right,
yeah.
That was then.
So I was finding all this stuff. I suddenly found there was all this stuff, and I remember reading that and thinking, the appendix to the thing where the definition of woman was, and thinking, what? This looks like a good law, but what? Anyone can be a woman? That's not right. And like thousands of other people, I filled in the consultation. So I was doing all that and used the Fair Play for Women website and kind of couldn't believe what I was hearing. So by the end of 2018, I was just on fire with this stuff. I just thought, this is too important to ignore. I have to do this. And I emailed a couple of people, a couple of groups. Nicola was the one who replied first and said, well, actually, I'm in London next week. Let's meet up. Mm-hmm. So we met up, and she was in town for an interview on the BBC. And I remember she said to me, slightly suspiciously, she said, yes, but who are you? Because at that time, everyone, and to some extent, we all still are a little bit paranoid, but at that time, everyone was paranoid and worried about being somehow infiltrated or exposed. Yes. It was kind of like you can't trust people. Maria McLaughlin had been physically assaulted the year before at Hyde Park Corner. They were still, and right up until, well, even up to the present day, but certainly that time it was still very difficult to get meeting venues. People would have to.
These were like the dark days, weren't they?
Yeah, right, really bad. And so Nick was kind of like, well, who are you? Can I trust you? Yeah. But very quickly, I think she decided she wanted a buddy to work with. She'd had a woman called Rebecca who helped her through the 2018 campaign, the fundraising, the Hands Off My Rights whole thing. And then it kind of, when that campaign was finished, Rebecca kind of went back to her day job, and so Nick was ready for a new partner. So that is how we did. And she came to my house then, and we kind of spent a day working out what was Fair Play for Women going to do now that the self-ID campaign was over and the government had taken away the consultation and it was all silent. We just had to wait and see how that would pan out. But she knew from having done that work that the real problem wasn't that some people had a certificate. The real problem was that so many organizations had just decided that anyone who said they were a woman was a woman. And
this is where Trina Budge from For Women Scotland also had the sharpness, I guess, or the acumen to spot what exactly the problem was with that equal representation on the gender boards thing. So if it wasn't, say, for Nicola at the time, if it wasn't for Trina and just spotting these little tiny things that they're just trying to sort of sneak in, we may not be here today in a completely different situation.
Well, and the Trina's insight's really important because what that Scottish law was trying to do was, it wasn't like a lot of the exceptions for single sex in the Equality Act are to do with separate services or single sex services. You know, all the stuff we talk about a lot where men and women need to be separate, mainly for everyone's privacy, but mainly for the benefit of women. But there's another piece called positive action, which is you can, if a group is really underrepresented and disadvantaged, it's about addressing historical disadvantage, historical prejudice. And that's what this act was meant to do. It was meant to say, you know, women are underrepresented on boards, let's try and get them a bit more present. And of course, she spotted that wasn't going to work at all if actually you didn't have women. If you had men who identify as women on boards, then you're not going to hear female voices, which was the whole point. In fact, you're going to hear, literally, you're going to hear from men instead, and men who have a particular notion of what womanhood is, but who have no experience of it. So it was really bad. The other thing I didn't know back then is that the gender representation on Scottish public boards was already 49% of women.
Yes, it wasn't even necessary.
It wasn't necessary. So she saw, I think, that it was you know, a Trojan horse for getting self-ID absolutely embedded in Scottish public law.
Which was crucial. And with so many of these stories, like even with yourself, you saw things, you're like, that's not right, I'm going to get in touch with others. Nicola saw something and she's like, I must do something. She starts an organization. Fair Play for Women, which was one of the first that I came across when I started looking into this in about 2019. So I came across Transgender Trend, Fair Play for Women, and kellie-jay King and her events. So there's so much, I think, that people who have been in this for a bit longer will recognize, like the events that you mentioned that people have been to, and obviously the characters. But this gives us so much more information of all the hard graft that these 4 women have put in, all these meetings that they went to, all these talks, all these campaigns. It's incredible.
Well, I hope that it's not too much detail, because actually what I did was I spent a lot of time talking to each of them.
Right.
And asking them how things felt. What were you thinking then? How did that feel? And I wanted people to get the sort of inside story about what it was like to be a pioneer in a very difficult field.
Because they were kind of like the founding mothers of Terf Island, right?
Well, I think they were probably, you know, the generation that went mainstream.
Right.
Because there were women before,
you
know, who did important things. And I've mentioned some of them in the introduction, the chapter you showed, Welcome to Terf Island. So there were other women who were talking about this 15 years before, and they must have found it very difficult. But yes, I think in order for us to become Terf Island, it was those big pushes. So it was ending puberty blockers in the UK, which was absolutely pioneering. It was stopping legal self-ID when the government was all set to adopt it, which was really important. It was getting the forced outer judgment, which protected gender-critical beliefs in law, really important. And it was kellie-jay, well, she's just a bit of a star, isn't she? She goes around the world and everybody wants a piece of her.
And she's absolutely fearless. But
she really is.
I mean, this is, again, we've got these 4 very different women, so it shows very different approaches, but also very different personalities. And, you know, as we're rowing the Terf Island boat, you need a very mixed team in terms of skill sets, in terms of personalities, because we all speak to different audiences.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of our challenges is how do you recruit people to understand that this is important, that there are issues here, conflicts of rights that need to be sorted out, and that it's a completely reasonable thing to talk about. And so if you don't have a range of voices, I think you risk only recruiting a certain type of supporter. So I think that's part of the challenge. There have to be people who provide courage to others. You know, Riley Gaines in the US, who was one of the swimmers, she's the one who tied with Leah Thomas at the national championships. She said that it was kellie-jay shouting, "He's a man," who gave her the courage to speak up. So you have a range, but I know there are other people who think that's really mean and cruel, and actually it distances them from us, and it makes them not want to listen because they think that we're being unnecessarily unkind to people that they think have got sort of emotional fragility, and why wouldn't you try and accommodate them?
Yes. I guess some people naturally are more in the foreground, some are in the background. And there's Murray Blackburn Mackenzie.
MBM, yeah.
They're not big known faces, if you like, but all the work that they put in and the analysis that they provide. I was in Edinburgh last Thursday for the For Women Scotland demonstration outside Holyrood. And then I really had this sense of, wow, I'm so proud to be on this side. Yeah. Right? And that's what I think this book, again, sort of gives to the readers, because we were there, and you're like, Marion and Susan and Trina, they don't even have an office. They just work out of their kitchen or living rooms, and one runs a farm, and they managed to get this incredibly important ruling at the Supreme Court.
They got to the Supreme Court. I mean, it's astonishing what they did. And when you think that
that's a whole
they lost the very first case, and then they appealed and won, and then the government didn't properly deal with that. Then the Scottish government, having lost the fight to say a woman is anyone who identifies as a woman, they said, okay, all right, well, we have to respect the courts. But actually, it's anyone female plus anyone with a gender recognition certificate. So they still weren't giving up. And then For Women Scotland, went to court again, lost, went to the appeal court. This time they lost. And I remember when Marion said, we're going to the Supreme Court. And of course, you have to get permission to be heard. They mostly don't hear cases because, you know, their time is valuable. It has to be something really important. Yeah. But the fundraising you have to do, the legal work you have to do, and they did all of that. And again, I think when people look at Terf Island, they really envy us that we have that judgment.
This is all grassroots. It's women going, huh? Looking into stuff.
Yeah.
And then organizing.
Yeah.
And fighting. And getting knocked back, picking themselves back up again and going again.
Yes, because you talked about For Women Scotland and also about MBM.
Yes.
And of course, The Women Who Wouldn't Wait covers all of that. It's really good.
Okay, so that covers that.
And that's part of, although I talk about some of that work in the book where it comes up, for example, one of the bits where a few people have told me this is what made them cry, but sort of happy tears, is when Stephanie finally met J.K. Rowling.
Yes, there's a picture of that in the book.
Yeah, there is.
Right, there's pictures in the book.
Yeah.
But again, it makes it a very human story.
Yeah. Sorry, just to say, the reason why that's relevant is it was women from For Women Scotland and MBM between them who organised that.
Right.
So yeah, so there's the Scottish scene is such a big part of our success as Terf Island that of course it has to be in there, and luckily we were at final stage when we got that judgment in the For Women Scotland case, and so I was able to write about that in the final section of the book.
The idea for the book, was that something that you came up with, or did somebody say, hey, Fiona, we need a book like this and you're the person to write it?
Neither of those.
Okay.
So one time when Nicola was down here staying with me, and we were out walking and talking and joking, and I was talking about, I said, oh, well, that'll all be in the book. When we were talking about things that went on. Because a lot of what goes on, people don't know about. Mm. And that's one of the reasons why I always think we should give credit to other people, but we should never take it for ourselves, because even when we think we've done something, you don't know what other people were doing at the same time.
Right.
Because I know that a lot of what we're doing, people don't know about. And a lot of what Nick did, what Nick and I did together couldn't be public because of other people who were involved. So I always think, don't take credit, but make sure you give credit where it's due. But we were talking about some of this kind of secretive work that we were doing, and I was saying, oh yeah, well, that'll be in the book. And she's like, ho, yeah, there won't be a book. I said, no, really, I think you should write a book. I think you should write the story of Fair Play for Women because it's really important and it's game-changing. So I spent a year almost trying to persuade her that she should write a book. And she'd say, I'm not sure. I said, I'll help you. Look, I did a chapter structure. I did lots of stuff. I said, I'll help. And by coincidence, at the same time, an agent approached us, a guy approached us who was a book agent. And he said, I think there's a story here. I think this is really important. So between me and him, we both kind of tried to work on Nicola to get her to write. And then she would I would manage to wear her down, and she'd say, okay, all right then. Okay, we can do it. And then the next time we spoke, she'd say, you know what, I've been thinking about that. I don't think it's right. So eventually I got the message, and she didn't want to do it because she didn't want to self-aggrandize. She really thought, you know, I'm not that important. Lots of people have done lots of things. It's not for me to claim any great role in this. But I felt differently. And also I remember talking to Shelley Charlesworth, who works with Stephanie, because Shelley and I used to joke about being the deputies, you know, being the lieutenants,
right?
You know, because there was Stephanie and there was Nick, and then we were kind of like their lieutenants.
And even with Stephanie, her twin sister Helen, she's done lots of work with like local councils and local
that is true.
schools.
Helen Saxby, So I remember talking to Shelley, and both of us and I was saying, you know, Nick and Stephanie have done incredible things, and lots of people don't know it. And so from there, it kind of evolved into me thinking, okay, I feel a duty to write, responsibility to make sure Nick gets the credit she deserves. Shelley felt that for Stephanie, and I said, oh, I think I can do that. I can write Stephanie's story. And then when I thought about what's the proposition, what's the structure, I thought, you know, there are a few big campaigns that have absolutely made us into Terf Island, and those are the ones led by these women. So I was originally going to have that each chapter was a campaign rather than a person. So Transgender Trend, Hands Off My Rights, which is Nick's campaign against self-ID, Let Women Speak, and Worthy of Respect in a Democratic Society, which was the ruling that Maya won. And then once we eventually were ready to publish, you know, the publisher said, no, actually, it's about the people, not the campaigns. So the campaigns are in there, but it's about the people.
Right.
But that's how it came about. I thought there are some important stories here, and then there are many other people with important stories too, but I've picked these ones, and I already spent a lot of time with Stephanie and with Nick, but I spent time, you know, clipped a microphone on them and said, let's walk and talk, and we talked about it all. And then I did the same with Maya and kellie-jay, just recorded them telling me, and I was able to ask them. I mean, there's a lot in the public domain, but I was able to ask them those questions about how did that feel, what happened. And I think that insight into how it was for them is really important, because, you know, you can present, like Nick went on TV and she's really introverted. She really didn't feel comfortable. She's really out of her comfort zone, but she put on such a brave face that you wouldn't know that. And so other people might think, well, I can't do that. She can do that, but I can't do that.
Yeah.
So we kind of felt it's a manual for people to understand that they can, not just on this issue, but maybe other issues too.
Right. And that's why it's so great to have 4 very different personalities. I mean, completely different.
They really are, aren't they?
So that they'll all resonate in a different way with different people. Like, and I was wondering, because originally your background is in branding.
Yeah, brand management,
So I was wondering if you were to look at these 4 in the book as brands, if you like.
Yeah.
Because in branding, like I've got my early background is in branding, so we would do a lot of work analyzing the market, analyzing different consumer archetypes, and you plot them all on a map, and then
you pick your space, don't you? You pick your space where you want your business to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting way to think about it, because maybe that's part of our success as Terf Island, because in a market, there's no point in launching a brand into space that's already taken. You want to be in a different space. And of course, you know, these women, they are very different, and they worked in different space. So kellie-jay is all about, she's brash, she's super confident.
I never lose.
Yeah. And she also gives a voice to other people, and she just goes everywhere, and she's not about, policy analysis or any of that stuff. You contrast that with Nicola Williams, who is, really rigorous, goes back to primary sources, really doesn't want it to be about her at all, doesn't speak off the cuff. If Nick says something, it's true. And even things like when I worked with her, she could be quite challenging, because things that you just think are true, she'll say, well, what's your source for that? How do you know?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So really different. And then Stephanie, absolutely rooted in empathy for children. When you read about her early life and her work communicating with kids, that business that she developed about how do adults and children properly understand one another. And one of the things I hadn't really grasped fully about her approach until I talked to her some more for the book is it's about their children first, and they have some kind of dysphoria or novel identity or trans identity, if you want to call it that. That's second. They're children first.
Yeah.
And you have to remember that we treat children differently. We do not treat them as mini adults. But when the trans label goes on, all that goes out the window.
David Bell from the Tavistock, he said the same thing, that even to use the term trans child, it's a foregone conclusion then.
And just to finish the set, so Maya, again, I didn't know this until I really got to know her, but she was one of the people who started the Let Toys Be Toys campaign. Yeah, and Stephanie was part of the No More Page 3 campaign. So Maya had been a bit of she'd done this kind of parenting-led thing. I think I think they started on Mumsnet, and then they did Let Toys Be Toys. But then she went off, and she wasn't a campaigner. She was a professional woman. She worked in the development sector. She did her projects and her analysis. A little bit like Nick in that, very rigorous, first principles, thorough. Definitely, more of an introvert than an extrovert. So definitely not seeking the limelight at all. And as we know, how she ended up here was because of her engagement with the 2018 Gender Recognition Act proposals, picking up a leaflet from a Fair Play for Women leaflet and leaving it in the office, and then eventually, of course, losing her job and having the courage then to tackle that and to see it through. So it wasn't, she certainly didn't set out expecting to campaign, not at all. It wasn't.
Right. A lot of this is very organic.
Yeah, really. Really organic. And actually, what it shows too is that anybody can do it. There's no right way to be a campaigner.
Which is a really important message. Because I just thought, I'm going to make a video. I'm just going to make a little song to take the piss out of Dr. Harrop, right? That's the first one I did, I think. And then it just, I guess you just find your way.
Yeah, so you're another example, you see, of a different voice. So coming back to your idea of the brand map, the market landscape, these are all really quite different ways of coming at this. And there are many others. And so maybe that's why we're special. But I don't like to kind of claim specialness for us too much, because I think that there are many other people in other countries who are really committed and talented and courageous and articulate. So it's not because we're great campaigners and they're not. They're great campaigners too, but for some reason, which we might talk about, somehow it just coalesced in the UK in a way that individual campaigns in, say, the USA, Canada, Australia, they just haven't been able to have the political impact.
Right, and I guess also somehow they all connected. And one thing that you pointed out in the book, or that I heard you talk about to Helen Joyce, is that there's so many little connections, because it was Venice Allen and Linda Bellos that were taken to court.
Yes.
That's a few years ago now.
Yeah.
And I looked that up the other day, and there were pictures of supporters outside, and Maya was there. And I'm like, this was before her case.
Yeah,
she was there.
That was the first thing she ever went to.
So that's the first thing she went to.
And kellie-jay was there too.
kellie-jay was there, and that's where she picked up a leaflet from for Fair Play for Women.
Yeah.
That ended up on her desk. That created her whole hoo-ha.
Yeah.
It's so wonderful to see the somehow, as different and disparate, is that the word? Mm-hmm. As we might be as a movement. Mm. And yet there's all these tiny little things putting us together.
Yeah, I think so. I found that really nice, and something that didn't make it into the book, actually, that Maya had stickers that she designed herself that said, and they weren't the most brilliant stickers, right? They were quite wordy, and it said something like, if it says that it's a single sex space, that means you have to be female, read the Equality Act, something like that, these stickers. Anyway, she had these stickers, and she went along, and I'm not sure if it was Westminster, but between us, she couldn't quite remember if it was that Westminster Magistrates Court where she went along to support Linda and Venice, or whether it was another occasion, but she had these stickers, and kellie-jay saw them and said, "Oh, I like those stickers. They're good. Can I do those?"
Right.
And I went, "Yeah, sure. And so kellie-jay made that part of her inventory on her website. Now, she doesn't remember either that that's where they came from. She thinks someone else did them, but Maya's quite sure she originated them.
So before you sort of, got piqued and you got in touch with Nicola, like throughout your life, maybe as a teenager or as a young woman, were you always aware of, were you like into feminism? Or
Yeah.
did you feel the pressure to be a certain way, especially in the business world?
Yes. I mean, when I went into business, it was pretty sexist. But at the same time, I felt like the rules had changed, and, the fight for equality was won, and I would be able to progress. And sometimes people were really sexist, and, men would comment on your legs or whatever, stupid stuff. But that seemed trivial to me, because I thought we were operating in a world of rules in which some people might behave badly, but actually it wasn't allowed in any meaningful way. And so I thought that I would have said, well, of course I'm a feminist, but I'm ashamed to say, we don't really need to do very much, do we? And I progressed. I was the breadwinner in my house. My husband looked after the kids. I worked and traveled and did all my stuff, and thought, well, that's what feminism has made possible. That's what other people made possible for me, that I can have that career. And I'm just a woman doing stuff. It's not even, I'm just being, right? I'm just being a professional person. Yeah, but it doesn't matter. So I happen to be a woman doing it. That's a proof that feminism worked, because now I can do this. And I kind of can't help thinking that if I'd known then what I know now, I would have been very demoralized, because actually I think that this movement reflects how women as a sex are still second-class citizens. If women were the ones demanding that they get access to men's prisons or men's sport, or, look how long it took for even men's clubs and men's golf clubs to let women in. So I sort of think, in the end, it's really obvious who gets listened to, and that the men who identify as women, they know who the men are. And so I wasn't an activist. And I actually think that's part of what's extraordinary about this movement, is that I think I'm kind of not unusual, that there are some fantastic people who were always wise to it, like Stephanie doing No More Page 3, and Maya doing Let Toys Be Toys. Yeah. They were proper feminists, but I wasn't. I was just a woman doing what feminism had made possible, which was being a professional person, having a nice career, having my partner and my children while also going to work. And once I began to see, but it was very late, 2018 was when I began to see.
Well, I mean, so many of us, we were completely blindsided by the whole thing. So if you think about, Janice Raymond wrote The Transsexual Empire that was published in 1979.
Oof, yeah.
To warn the world.
Yeah, Sheila Jeffries was writing about this, Julie Bindel, all the people I've talked about. Yeah, they were doing their thing, but most of us, and I think it's an important reminder too, I think that's still true for most of the population. I think most people still think there's a tiny minority of people who have some kind of distress in their minds that makes them need to be accepted as if they were the other sex, and let's just do it, and what difference does it make?
And they don't see the conflict.
No.
And that's one of our challenges, is how do we communicate that there's a conflict?
Especially when what you're in danger of doing, what we're in danger of doing, when we talk, the risk is when we raise these issues that a lot of people think we're just being mean to a tiny group of people, primarily men, who already have this difficulty of being trans. And what they don't understand is that whilst there may be some people who, the old model of they just want to live quietly and all of that, maybe there are some of those people, but things have changed. And there's a very aggressive push just to erode boundaries, sex boundaries, age boundaries, both. And that it's so far from being a sort of benign movement of a small group of people just needing us all to be a little bit accommodating. The demands are extraordinary. And again, but that's the problem with the communication, is you can't get people to know that, because as soon as you start to talk about that, they're hearing you being really mean and nasty to people who mean no harm and are unlucky to be born trans. So it's very difficult to get over that hurdle.
One thing that has changed is we're no longer in the age of no debate. There is debate everywhere, on the street, in the parks, because of Kellie-Jay. She's brought it to the masses, to the public square. In politics, so there's that new party, I think at the moment it's just called Your Party, that Jeremy Corbyn has set up with Zara Sultana and Adnan Hussein. And already there's a thing about Adnan saying we have to protect women-only spaces and we have to acknowledge sex. And Zara basically saying, if you don't believe that trans women are women, then we don't want you in our party.
Which the Green Party have also said.
Which the Green Party has also said. So a good thing about it is it's being said, and people are now very entrenched. So, and there's no two ways about it. You either acknowledge sex-based rights or you don't. And I think that's really good, that at least that's really crystallized now. Yeah.
So when we do polling, it's very clear that at a sort of generic level, everyone thinks the right thing to do and say is, of course, I favour trans rights and da-da-da. But when you get to the specifics of what does that mean in practice, first of all, they can't really say what rights people still want or need. And secondly, they absolutely defend some of the sex-based policies that have always been around. And they don't think that you should dispense with conventional practices like having sex-segregated sport, for example, or letting...
Sport is a big one, isn't it?
Sport's a big one, letting men into women's changing rooms. So even if you're relatively uninformed about the debate, and even if you therefore instinctively want to be a good person, an accommodating person, you think it doesn't... What does it matter to me? Trans rights or human rights? Even if that's your starting point, as soon as you get into specifics, usually they're on side with the issues that we're fighting to regain, some of those safeguards, some of those boundaries. And even then, I think that's before they know who we're really dealing with here. I think a lot of the time people imagine that a trans woman is barely distinguishable from a woman. I mean, after all, the actor who played Potato Dolls, I mean, that just feels like stereotypes to me. I don't know how they can think that's a good thing. But the woman who played a trans character in Coronation Street, so the nation's most beloved soap opera over many, many years. She was playing a man who had supposedly transitioned many years before, and then it was completely astonishing to the other characters in Coronation Street to find that this person had been born male. But they cast a woman. So of course that just reinforced that you can't tell. And if people really think you can't tell, then of course they think we're being mean.
Plus, if they don't think that you can't tell, then they think it's a gay man who had issues or something. So, and again, with the gays, I guess many politicians or institutions thought, well, we got that horribly wrong, so now we have to sort of overcompensate for that. And then, like, last week I was in Guildford for Pride in Surrey, and I spoke to a local mayor, the mayor for Waverley, Penny something. I couldn't believe how happy she was to say to me, oh, I don't get this sex gender stuff. I just don't get it. I'm old. Ha 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 ha. Supreme Court ruling. I don't care. I'm like, you're a politician. You have a responsibility to uphold the law, and for the people and the organizations that you work with to uphold the law. And here you're saying that you don't care. But she's also saying, I don't know anything about it.
And she was there supporting Pride. So I think that tells you a lot, because, Pride has been a fantastically successful movement, and they've reached a point where everyone thinks it's just a good thing. And what kind of person would question Pride? You'd have to be a horrible bigot, wouldn't you? So that's where they've got to. And actually, it's interesting. I had thought that the backlash against some of the trans overreach might hurt gay rights, but I don't think that has happened.
Maybe not in the UK. I mean, one of the arguments that I often, or the things that they say to me online is, you'll be next.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how can you say that? Because we've been on the menu for the trans lobby for decades now. And that's, again, we had the lesbian interveners in the For Women Scotland case, who, again, are just ordinary women just going, what? They managed to get all their legal arguments in order. They were quoted in the Supreme Court ruling.
Yeah, their intervention was really important, because I was in court when the case was being heard. And the judges were very intrigued by this idea that lesbians were somehow losing the right to meet as a group.
Yeah.
Because if you interpreted having a gender recognition certificate as having changed your sex for all purposes, that meant that men who said they were lesbians, who got the paperwork from the government, were entitled to be there. And they talked about this. They talked about it brilliantly in the judgment, actually, about how you're not sexually attracted to a piece of paper. So if you're lesbian and you don't fancy the bloke when he's a bloke, the government issuing him with a document saying he's a woman is not going to change that.
No.
And that definitely landed with the judges.
Good. Now that we're pushing back here in the UK successfully, we're hardly out of the woods.
No.
Because, like the trade union conference, they passed a motion saying they reject the Supreme Court.
When has that ever happened before? I mean, you talked about how great that day was when we were all inside and then outside the Supreme Court, when we got the judgment on the 16th of April that For Women Scotland had won their case. And I remember looking across, we all were warned we had to be absolutely silent in the court. And we were all sitting there, those of us who had any kind of part, as interveners, or obviously the claimants, we all had reserved seating. So I was sitting in the front row on one side, and I looked across at Susan and Marion from For Women Scotland. And when the judgment was being read, they were just silently weeping. There were tears rolling down their faces. And then when the judges all got up and went out, everybody just burst into a spontaneous round of applause. It was amazing. And then we all came out, and it was so joyous. I did not anticipate then how many people would claim the judgment wasn't clear, we don't agree with it. And the two things can't really be true at once, right? If you don't agree with it, you must know what it means.
Yeah.
But simultaneously, it's not clear. We're not going to take any action. We don't know what to do. We've set up a working group. It's going to take some time. The amount of resistance to just taking a very clear judgment that told people what they already knew, which is sometimes the men have to do one thing and the women have to do another. It's been that way for a long time.
This is one thing that Sal Grover always points out, is like, it's the most boring thing in a way.
Yeah, it's completely mundane, isn't it?
On the one hand, it's so crazy, but she's like, oh, this is the most boring fight ever. Even though so many people pay such a heavy toll, which also comes up in your book. There was a blurb that I read about Venice Allen, and how when she had to go to court, the impact that on her emotionally, on her family life, and the kids going, Mummy, can you stop. Please.
I know. And also with kellie-jay, when she told me about actually what she was thinking when she was trying to fight her way out of that mob in Auckland, and she said, I hope the kids aren't watching this. And people, it was being live streamed, and Angie Jones in Australia watching it thinking, oh my God, and people in the chat going, is she dead? Is she dead? Yeah. I mean, really disturbing, yeah.
So one thing that we see, because sometimes I think, oh my God, they're crazy. They're just nuts. And it's kind of easy to go to that place. And some are nuts, especially the ones online and on the streets, who protest us and things. And that's one thing that made me feel so kind of, as I said earlier, proud to be on this side of the fence when I was in Edinburgh, because you had these formidable women, just normal women, but formidable women. And they organized that whole event. It was fantastic. The atmosphere was so good. And then you had one man with a sound system who just tried to ruin it. He posted on his Instagram when he arrived, I'm here to piss off the TERFs. So he's not there to make an argument. He's not actually there to protest. He's only there to disrupt.
Yeah.
So there were about 10 of them. But they scream, they shout. I mean, that day they didn't, but normally that's what they do.
They make
try
noise.
to drown you out. They have no arguments. They smear you as a Nazi. That's what they've got. And then you've got the other side where there's absolute determination. There's a whole bunch of intelligence and knowing how to analyze things and how to make your argument. It's so impressive.
You know, and one thing again that really struck me when I did my work for the book with Stephanie, she absolutely comes from tremendous empathy and concern and care. Helen's the same, actually. Helen Joyce, when you talk about what piqued her, it was realizing they were sterilizing kids.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's really upsetting to be accused of not caring about trans kids or wanting them to come to harm, because actually it's the absolute opposite.
Yeah, but they've kind of tried to monopolize the love is love and we love everyone and you know.
But you know, people say, you know, why don't you accept my child as they are, and your problem is you're a bigot, you can't accept them. But they're the ones who can't accept themselves, or their parents won't accept them. I think that's one of the cruelest aspects of this movement, the exploitation of distressed children and their parents to fuel the legitimacy of older men who want to dress up, get off on it, invade women's spaces. And they're, you know, that's not a universal description of everyone in this movement by any means, but we know that those categories exist. Yeah. So I feel there's a lot of manipulation of those parents and their children, and that's why they're afraid of us and why they think we're hateful people. But we won't win through those people. You know, there's the message and there's the messenger. Yeah. So we're not the right messenger for those people. We take our message to other places. People who are able to listen, maybe because they're not so personally affected. But again, I think one of the big challenges is you don't always know who's personally affected, and you don't know how much that's obscuring their ability to hear you. Even when we're being reasonable, we're talking to policymakers and lawmakers, we think we're talking about the law, about human rights, about balancing everyone's rights. But if they've got a trans kid or a sibling who's trans or whatever, that's absolutely front of mind. I must defend my trans family member, and these people want to take rights away from my sister or my daughter or whatever. So, but they don't necessarily tell us.
Yes. We're pushing back, we're making progress, and I say we, yes, if you know.
Well, we're all doing our bit, aren't we?
But then I'm like, what is the reaction against this going to be? We already know from that union passing the motion. There's that local mayor that I mentioned who's just saying, oh, I don't care. Yeah. I'm thinking there are other powers that be that we don't necessarily know about. You know, it's not necessarily Keir Starmer or... Yeah,
so definitely you're right. The European political scene and people don't have much visibility over that. We haven't all got the bandwidth to be off fighting European legislation as well, but that is a problem. Some of that is a problem because there's been so much institutional capture, and it all happened over a period of many, many years when we were all just busy living our lives. Yeah. And that's why we've got so much work to do, and to root out the unthinking self-ID policies that have just been put in place everywhere, so that now people think that it's unreasonable for women to say, do you know what, in the women's changing rooms in my gym or at my workplace, actually, I just want that to be female people.
Or there shouldn't be a man in the breastfeeding support group.
I mean, really.
I mean, it's insane.
It's gross, isn't it?
And at least here in the UK, we have the advantage that in the Equality Act, gender reassignment is separate from sex. Yes. In Holland, we don't have that.
Yes, and that's a really, really significant thing. You're totally right. And it's not like that in the US either, you know, so that's been a problem that they've rolled. Identifying as a sex as almost like a manifestation of sex. Yeah. And so it's not as clear as it could be.
And when it's rolled together, it means that gender always trumps.
Yeah. Yeah, or that you can't protect a sex category if that category has both sexes in it.
Yeah. I mean, it's duh.
Yeah, and this is a problem in Australia
if I ever write a book about it, I'll just call it duh. So, if someone from the other side was to read Terf Island... Yeah. Let's just be idealistic for a moment, and they have an open mind. What would you hope for them to take away from the book?
A few things. So one thing is I would hope that they see that it isn't an anti-trans movement. It's a pro-women, pro-children, pro-gay rights movement that motivates all the people in that book. There's nobody in there whose starting point is, I have a problem with trans people. They have a problem with demands that have a negative impact on other groups. So that would be my, and if they took that out of it, I'd be really happy, because it's that lack of common understanding that stops us from having meaningful conversations, and especially the politicians. If they understood that we're not anti anything, we're pro something that everyone agreed was a good thing. Everyone agrees children need protection, safeguarding, allowed to grow up non-conforming if they want. Everyone agrees women need single-sex spaces sometimes. Everyone agrees gay people should be free to live their lives without discrimination, without harassment. All we're doing is trying to protect those rights that we already had won and everyone agreed on. So that would be the most important thing. I don't really care whether people think these women are, good people or bad people, but I do care that they understand that the demands they're making are actually commonplace and reasonable and not anti anybody else.
Right. Now, let me go through...
That's such an interesting question. I never thought about that.
So, what could we learn from the other side and how they've gone about their business for the last 10, 15 years?
So, the other side has done everything they've done by stealth up until now, and that's why they had to insist on no debate. And they can't have no debate anymore. But we can't win by stealth, I don't think, and nor should we. That's not how good policies get made. That's not how you take the public with you. This has to be one of the few movements where the more people get to know about it, the more they oppose it. So if you think about something like equal marriage, it started off being unpopular, and then over time, people understood that it wasn't a threat to them. It was just a reasonable thing to do. And actually, even people who voted against it in Ireland and in the UK, they had a referendum, we didn't. But even people who were not in favour have come to see that it's fine. It's no big deal. But this one, the polling over time goes the other way.
Yes.
So that tells us that even if they got to where they got to by stealth, the right way for us to undo some of the bad policies is by shedding light on it.
Yes.
Because that's how we get popular support. That's how people learn that it's okay to talk about it. That's how the politicians understand that actually, if they just want to do what's popular, what we want is what's popular. Even if they have no principles of their own, they still should. They usually want to do what's popular, and that's where we are.
This is your first book.
Yes.
You've never written a book in your life, right? No. Did you write like blog posts or other stuff?
Yeah. I used to write blog posts. I used to write, because when I was a marketing consultant, I used to write lots of blog posts about brand issues and marketing issues and advertising and stuff like that. So that probably was years of crafting a style. But actually, I wrote this book in a different style because I realized, and I had help from my agent here, I realized that the most compelling way to tell a story is just to tell the story as if you're literally saying, and then I did this, and then this happened, and then I was thinking this. And so when I was writing business blogs, they were much tighter and more compressed. And when I sat down to write these women's stories, I thought, well, actually, I am just telling their story, so just tell it like it is. And oddly enough, that made it easier to write. And I quite enjoyed it because some of what they were telling me was astonishing. And even though I'd been really involved in this, and I'd written loads of articles for the Fair Play for Women website, and I've written articles on the Sex Matters website. We don't put names on like everybody writes in-house style, but lots of the content on the Fair Play for Women website I had done. Some of the content on the Sex Matters website I've done. But I needed to find my own voice to write this. And at the same time, I needed to tell their stories in the most compelling way. But it was kind of easier.
Okay.
Yeah, because it was me. It was just me talking and letting them talk.
Yeah. And what were some of the things what was the most enjoyable part of writing the book?
Yes. The best bit was something you've touched on already, finding the connections. So discovering, I mean, some of the women that I've written about and talked to for the book, I didn't really know that well before. So someone like Venice Allen or Julia Long, I really didn't know how much they'd done. And so finding that out and then having to follow the threads that I started to pull and having to go and, you know, think, oh God, I need to know more about that. And then finding their stories was really great. And then how they were all connected and, you know, some of the photographs, like there's a photograph in there of Nick Williams with Stephanie Davis-Arai, and it's a really lovely picture. And actually, I was at that event, and it was the first event where Maya spoke. And we were all there. And in fact, Maya spoke at that event as a last-minute stand-in because someone else hadn't been able to turn up. Yeah, so all of the connections are really a really nice part of it. But when I was involved first, you know, 2018, 19, 20, it was kind of exciting that everyone knew everyone else. But after a while, I started to think, well, that's all very well and nice, but wouldn't it be better if we had a huge movement where people didn't know each other because it was so big? Wouldn't that be a better thing? So maybe we're getting to that stage now.
Well, I mean, we're also at a point now where fractures are becoming more apparent. And I think people naturally gravitate to, you know, different personalities or different organizations. There's so much still to be done. I feel this is like the first battle. It took like 5-10 years, but this is where we've had huge shifts in terms of ending no debate. We've got the Supreme Court ruling, Tavistock's GIDS has been closed. Obviously now there's the new clinics up and running. Not necessarily sure if everything there is hunky-dory. How secure are the wins that we've secured?
It's a great question, because when Nick, you know, when self-ID, in 2018, when Nick led the campaign on self-ID and that was successful, during the process of doing that, that's when she understood that the law was only one little bit of it and all these other things would have to be rooted out. And, you know, a lot of people talk about it's like Japanese knotweed. You know, you keep pulling and pulling and how do you get it out? Yeah. So how secure are the wins we've got? I think that politicians do not have a will to undo the things we've won because it's too difficult. They actually mostly want to move on from it. So
Plus,
I think
they would have to actively argue against our rights.
But, so on the one hand, I think that the legal wins are pretty robust and reliable, but they're only 10% of the problem because until we get the self-ID that's been put into practice, not because it's the law, but just because people did it, until we get that reversed, you know, nothing changes.
Yeah.
And so that's why it's a much longer battle than we thought. You know, Maya says in the book, I think this is going to be the rest of my career now. Yeah, and it was never her plan.
Yeah,
it's not why she got into this.
And every day there's something new.
Yeah.
And every day something gets crazier than what we've seen before. Another good thing is now that, at least in the UK, it's not the same in other places, but again, Terf Island is different. It's not as much a left versus right thing here as it is, for example, in the States.
Yes.
Again, last Thursday, there were speakers at the For Women Scotland demonstration from the Scottish Conservatives, from Scottish Labour, even an SNP person, I think, spoke. It's becoming more cross-party.
Yeah.
West Streeting has continued the ban on blockers and made it, well, not permanent, but not as
temporary, I suppose.
Not as temporary as the 3-month sort of ban that was in place that he extended. Now that's going on for longer. It will be reviewed, so we have to keep our eyes on that. We have to keep our eyes on what they're doing with this idea of a so-called conversion therapy ban.
That, I think, is a risk.
But at least it seems to be shared. You know, obviously the Greens and the Lib Dems are going completely the other way, but it forces the issue now. And like, as we said earlier, with that new party, now they have to choose, where do you stand?
Yeah.
It's a great thing that's in a way become the test now. What is a woman? As ridiculous.
Yeah. I'd like us to move on from that, because actually it's too easy to dismiss that as a political trick.
Culture war.
Yeah,
and this and that.
yeah. You know, women's rights aren't a culture war. You know, the Labour government has got this big pledge about ending or reducing or something male violence against women and girls. Well, how on earth is that compatible with letting men go into women's prisons? Yeah. It's so crazy. So that's why we have to get away from the gotchas or the kind of sound bites and actually deal in policy. Because that's where people understand the real life implications, and it's not, and we can't be kind at the expense of other people. You know, that's not reasonable. You can't make those decisions on behalf of everyone.
What would you say are top tips for effective turfing?
What a lovely question. I think there are different ways to be a TERF, and I think some of the most effective people are not even recognized as TERFs. So, you know, you and I, we're out there. All the people that I wrote about in my book, they're out there. But there are, of course, many other people who are just quietly doing, in their walk of life, reinstating the thing that everybody knows, which is, you know, sometimes sex matters and here's where it matters, and let's just make sure the policies are right. So I do think there are a lot of people quietly just talking not about trans, not about rights, not about anything like that, but actually in their job and in their whatever field they have influence in, reminding people of some basic things everybody knows. You know, there's still a problem of male violence. Women are victims of male violence because we're weaker, we're smaller. It's not sexist to say so. And children have to be protected because they're children. They're not allowed tattoos. They're not allowed to vote. They're not allowed to drink. They have to be protected. And, you know, we all agreed that sex stereotypes were a bad thing. So let's hold on to some of the basic things we've agreed. One of the things I often remind people when they say this is a hateful, right-wing, whatever, colonial movement, is that all the big global organizations that people would say are generally good, like the World Health Organization or the United Nations or UNICEF or whatever, they all promote the importance of single-sex facilities specifically to benefit women and girls. So in the developing world, they'll say, you know, girls need to be able to have single-sex toilets to be able to go to school. So there's nothing colonial or right-wing about single-sex toilets. It's just a universally recognized generic thing. So I think good turfing can be quietly just reminding people, not being a TERF at all, but just quietly reminding people of some basic things that we all know. Because if we can rebuild from the bottom up, then we'll get there without sort of triggering people's feeling that maybe the world has changed and we all have to be progressive and we all have to pretend that we don't know what we do know about the basics of humanity, which is we all have a sex and we all know what it is. And sometimes that matters.
As you were writing the book, how did you feel? Or was there a point where you had quite strong emotions? Or did you sort of approach it in more of a dry sort of methodical kind of way?
Well, it was kind of exciting to me to hear them. You know, all the conversations that I had for research were all one-to-one. So I felt really, I felt quite privileged that they were willing to spend the time with me to tell me their stories, everyone that I talked to. And it was kind of exciting because I thought, I mean, over and over again, I thought, God, this is amazing. I didn't know this. And I was then excited to share it.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so it was kind of exciting. I mean, sometimes there were things that were very shocking. Sometimes there were things that made me laugh. And I felt excited that I would be able to share that. Once or twice, I was almost crying with some of the things I heard.
Ooh,
yeah, really.
Do you remember one of those?
Well, one of them was I've already talked about, was kellie-jay talking about being afraid, thinking, if I've come all this way and I just die here, my children are going to be so angry with me. But hearing her talk about that was really upsetting. So mainly what I felt when I was doing it was kind of excitement at sharing these stories, because I thought they were such good stories and so worthy of admiration what these women had done.
And as a branding specialist...
What, me or you?
You. If you were to do a quick pitch for this, not necessarily by the book, but for the women of Terf Island and men to join in what would you say?
Well, I think that the women I've featured in that book are both ordinary and extraordinary. And I wanted to show both sides of that. So if you care about this, even if you think you're ordinary, if you think you're nothing special, you can do extraordinary things. And the thing that most of all motivates me is that even if you think that what you're saying and doing isn't making any difference, what you know for a fact is if you say and do nothing, you won't make any difference.
Yeah.
So you have to try, and you have to find your own way, and there are lots of ways to make a difference. You have to find your own, whatever works for you.
So, Terf Island, it is now on sale. Where can people get it?
Well, if they look online, the big retailers with online operations like Blackwell's and Amazon, that's where they can get it. There are some independent booksellers that have it too. Maybe people can go and ask for it.
Yeah, it should be in libraries.
It should be. Again, people can ask their library to order it.
Okay, so come and find your voice on Terf Island. Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed it, and I'm really going to enjoy reading this, because there were bits where I was like, oh, I want to read that a bit more, but I was on the train here, so I had to write my interview questions. I'm like, I want more time, but it feels like a book that you could really get engrossed in.
Yeah, some people have told me that they've stayed up to the wee hours reading. Yeah.
And you've got quotes from Richard Dawkins.
Yeah, I've got some good endorsements.
Right, everyone, so go get your copy. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you, everyone, for watching. And I shall see you in the next one. Ciao.
Bye.
Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to my PayPal and Patreon supporters. Because of you, I can make videos like this. Special shout out to my big spenders. Help Her Open, Mama Terf and the Terventines, me Julie, the lovely Mary, Julia, Dusty, Doodles, Leffy, Dorothy, Wildfire, Esther, and Martha. Thank you.